Hey there, how you doing? Today we're going to talk about the Crusades, the four causes and four effects of the Crusades. But what were they? What were the Crusades? Essentially, the Crusades were a series of wars um, started by Europeans to fight against this growing Muslim influence and expansion, and maybe even take back the Holy Lands or Palestine as they thought of them. Let's take a look at the map. The map always shows you everything you'd need to know. Uh, Here are the you see these first four crusades that are listed. In all, there were more than 8 crusades. They lasted for 200 years. Uh, and so why? What caused this? What caused all of this effort by Europeans to go and attack into the Holy Lands? And well, there's four big things, four causes, right? And it kind of depends on who you are. Um, but first of all, the Byzantines wanted help. And you can see here Constantinople. Um, the this Byzantine Empire had been much larger, and then over time it had gotten smaller and smaller, and the expansion of Islam and especially these Turks. That once the Turks came in there to what is today Turkey or Asia Minor, the you can see how they spread in and then just kind of didn't leave much for of what used to be this great Byzantine Empire. Just wasn't what it used to be. So the Byzantines wanted help, and so they reached out to their friends back in Europe, to the Pope and some others, and said, "Hey, you got to help us. Come help us because we are on the front lines, holding off these Turks, and we're preserving Christianity out here, and Roman culture, and so come help defend us." And eventually, Constantinople will fall. All of this area in Asia Minor will be taken over, um, and but not quite yet, right? But they said they saw the writing on the wall. They knew it was coming. Um, well, that was the Byzantines. They wanted help. That was the first reason. The second reason is that the Pope over here in Rome had this grand idea, and his grand idea was to bring the church together again, and in some ways to expand his influence, right? Because the church had split, and it had split into this Roman Catholic Church.
Good morning, Army Tigers. Teachers, please pardon for interruption. Students,
Hold
please
on.
stand for the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands.
Sorry for the interruption. School happens here still. um, but the Pope had this idea that maybe we could bring the church back together again. That the Byzantines, they had given up on the leadership of the Pope, and instead they preferred the leadership of the emperor in Constantinople, and uh, and they also had some, maybe some differences about whether the priests would marry or some other things. But the Pope thought, we ought to be able to bring this whole thing back together again. And so if we just turn our efforts, to the east, And especially if we could help these Byzantines take this new, get some of their land back, and man, wouldn't they love us? And maybe then we could like start to repair some of this damage and this split in the Christian church. So the Byzantines wanted help, and the Pope wanted to reunite the church. And then, of course, the third thing that caused the Crusades was feudalism. Feudalism was a system that just couldn't last forever, um, because the system of obligations from the king to the lord meant that for each lord, uh, if he could have a son that would take over his manor. But if you were another son, if you had a second son or a third son or a fourth son, they might become knights. But then what would they do except maybe cause trouble? Or, these are guys with swords and armor and stuff. And so um, the the Crusades had this certain kind of a promise. Um, uh, they promised a salvation for these young men. For these young knights. The Pope said, "Oh, you need to go and engage in this holy war to retake Jerusalem, and if you do, God will surely smile on you, right?" Um, and so these young knights went looking for salvation, and they went looking for recognition. They could maybe become somebody or become a leader. They went looking for new land and new property because uh, at home there weren't lands, because it was their older brother who would be inheriting their father's land. And so just even feudalism brought about this desire for knights and others to move out and go find something to do with themselves, right? All these knights and needed some place to go, and so hey, but let's go on a crusade. And then the fourth cause the um, of the Crusades was just a religious fervor. Okay, the Pope had blessed these efforts, and the battle cry of the Crusaders was, "God wills it." And they just believed that they were doing God's will. And so they kind of got stirred up in this feeling of being a holy warrior, that God was with them, that God wanted them to go out and kill people and slaughter innocent children. And to me, I'm thinking that doesn't make any sense, but that's what brought them to the Crusades. It was this religious fervor, right? Well, that's the four maybe causes of the Crusades. Now, what about the effects? Four effects of the Crusades. Well, in some ways, mostly nothing, right? Because these Europeans never really gained control of the Holy Land. Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And that's what they do for 200 years, they have 8 crusades. We're going to start a crusade again, and then start a crusade again. And then, oh, what now? Now we really are going to take back the Holy Land this time. And the reality is every time the soldiers went out there, all they did was, take off the Muslims. Because in reality, these knights would go out there, even if they had success, they would have some small strip of land and be totally surrounded and outnumbered uh, by people that did not want them there. Okay, so there was no way this could ever last. The other problem is the Europeans went out there, these knights, they'd go out there, because the Pope said I can have salvation if I go fight, and I want to have some glory and adventure, and so they went out there, and then they had their glory and adventure, and they achieved their salvation, and then they said, now we're going to go back to Europe. Now I'm going to go back home. And it's not like any of them really wanted to stay. They just wanted to go on the crusade and then come home. So the reality is, in a lot of ways, the Europeans didn't have any major victory in the Holy Lands. And so the first effect of the crusade is mostly nothing, right, from a European standpoint. It did, however, create the second effect. It did create a legacy, an ongoing legacy of bitterness and hatred between Christians and Muslims, between Europe and the Middle East, that exists to this day. I mean, 1,000 years ago, I don't think when those knights got on, set off to go fight to retake the Holy Land, I don't think that any of them would have predicted that in 1,000 years there would still be a conflict over Palestine, a religious conflict over Palestine. I mean, how could they have imagined that? Um, and but these crusades just caused this bitterness, this hatred on both sides, right? That exists even now, in at least in some regard, right? So that's a second and maybe depressing effect of the Crusades. A third effect would be the increased connection. It's like Europe got plugged into the rest of the world again. I mean, after the fall of Rome, this western part of Europe just settles into these habits of feudalism, and nobody is traveling anywhere, and there is no trade. There is no movement. The ideas are lost. People aren't learning how to read and write. Um, and the Crusades brought movement and travel and life again, and connected Europe with the rest of the world again. Okay. They had this desire for trade. I mean, once they saw these nice things that the Muslims had, they thought, well, where'd you get this stuff? And they would say, well, we got this from India or China. And so these Europeans began to realize maybe we should be trading. And this brought a whole new class and a whole new economic system into Europe to weaken feudalism. The Europeans also got and they got all these and made these improvements with their ships, because these ships had to sail over and carry these men to go fight. With navigation, the compass that the Chinese had created finally comes to Europe. So there's some benefits in navigation and in map making, and this, of course, will lead to those Europeans going on a new crusade, not east but west, to the Americas, here, within the next couple 100 years. So there's this real connection of Europe back to the rest of the world, and Europe comes out of the Dark Ages. It wakes up like, oh, we've been kind of isolated over here, just doing our own thing. And so that connection is, I think, important. And then if there was a real effect, number four, it would be in the Reconquista, okay, which was another kind of a crusade. If the Christians had success, their success was not in the Holy Land; it was in Spain, because the Muslims had come around North Africa and uh, advanced into Europe and into Spain. And with all of this religious fervor and the power of the church, there was a different kind of a crusade in Spain. It was called the Reconquista, the retaking, the reconquering, right, of Spain. And with these efforts, these Muslims were finally expelled from Western Europe. Okay, so Europe as a whole is, united under Christianity again, um, under the Catholic Church. So that may be, if there was a win for the Christians or the Europeans, that would be, I think, where they actually saw real progress in terms of taking and holding land, right? And being a real pushback against Islam. Because in other places, it just wasn't effective in the Holy Land. In fact, they ended up losing Constantinople. So, well, there you go. That's a little bit about the Crusades, four causes, four effects. There's some good reading for you, and I want you to check out these three sources of reading and be able to check out identify the author and the purpose and the occasion of these historical documents. Some from Christians and some from Muslims, written a long time ago. That's the other part of our class today. So there you go. Now you know everything about the Crusades.